All right, so welcome back to the NIH Library's Bibliometrics Training Series. My name is Chris Belter, and I'll be co-presenting today with Yaling Liu. So this is the final session in our 13-part series, so congratulations for making it this far. So what we wanted to do today is sort of do a kind of a wrap-up session where we sort of go back over a little bit of what we went over so far, talk a little bit about our standard report template, sort of revisit that report template, just to sort of walk through that, just to see where everything fits, where we're getting the data from, how that all fits into what a final product would actually look like. Then I'll talk briefly about sort of ways that we sort of go off script a little bit, and how we modify that template in certain ways, how we sort of move away from that template depending on what our customers are needed, those kinds of things. Then we'll spend probably the majority of the time talking about how we learned how to do bibliometrics, sort of tell our stories about how we sort of did, how we learned how to do all of this, how we learned how to provide these kinds of services, and talk about some of the lessons learned along the way, just to sort of give you some ideas of things that we learned as we learned how to do this. And then we'll close with just a couple of final thoughts, just to kind of wrap up the whole thing. So let's start out by talking a little bit about back to the library standard report. So we'll walk through it kind of page by page, just to give you a sense of what it looks like, what we're doing in each page, and where we're getting data from in each one of these things. Again, just show you where all of those pieces that we have talked about over the past 13 courses all fit together into a final product. So the first page of our report is really about the introduction and methods. And so the report that I'll be talking about is, again, related to the Fogarty International Center papers, the same data set we've been using all along, so you can see what a final product would actually look like for this particular data set. So our introduction page is really about talking about the methodology that we used, a little bit about some of the caveats, although we don't really go into a whole lot of detail about some of those. It's really more focused about the methodology, the data sources, analytical techniques, analytical methods, those kinds of things. So again, just to give an introduction to what we did, what's going to be in the report, all of those kinds of things. We also include a standard disclaimer at the end of this in every report that we do, talking about the limitations of the method itself. So there's a standard language that we used saying that there are limitations to the bibliometric approach. We recommend that people never actually use bibliometrics as a sole decision-making criteria. It should always be used in combination with other forms of evaluation, such as peer review, to actually make decisions. So that's standard. We put that on every report that we produce, just as a way of sort of recommending to people how this report ought to be interpreted, how we recommend people use it, those kinds of things. We're thinking about expanding that in some ways to sort of touch on some of the limitations in other areas, but we really haven't gotten to that. So we sort of lean on this sort of disclaimer paragraph for to do a lot of that work, and then mention either in email when we send, or maybe in a follow-up report or a follow-up meeting, saying these are some of the limitations, and we can go into those in a little more detail. Then we organized the report around the major themes of productivity, collaboration, topics, and citation impact. So we start with productivity. So the productivity, most of these charts and graphs come directly from the Web of Science or the Scopus interface. So when we're working with the publication set in whatever database we happen to be using, we can use those analyze results features to pull out things like the document type, number of publications per year, per subject category, per journal. A lot of that is, again, built into the databases, so a lot of that comes directly from either the database interface itself, or in some cases we will export the data and do the analyses from the exported data It depends on how you're interested in, but either way will work. But again, a lot of this comes directly from the website itself. There are other things that we might also be interested in looking at here. Sometimes we also look at the number of publications per mesh term, publications per funding agency, a bunch of other types of things, but those aren't in that standard report. Most of that is in custom analyses that we would work on in collaboration with the patrons. We then move into the collaboration analyses, and so we do this in two parts. The first collaboration page, page 3, is focused at the institutional level, and the second part is focused on the individual author level. So the analyses that are on this page are based on the cleaned version of the organizational affiliations. So the co-authorship rates, the collaborations per institution, and then this co-authorship network are all based on that cleaned version of the affiliation data. So we pull it down, parse it with Citation, clean it with OpenRefine, and then we'll do the counts of publications per institution based on that cleaned affiliation data. We'll also estimate the co-authorship rates by searching within that field for things like university to see how many of them have a university in that field. Divide by the total, that gives you the collaboration proportion with universities. Similar types of things with outside of the particular institution. If it has a delimiter in that cleaned affiliation field, that's an indication that there's some form of collaboration. So therefore, that's where that comes from, other types of things like that. Then again, with the publications per institution, again, we'll just count the number of publications per institution within that cleaned affiliation set to give us that chart. And then the co-authorship network, again, is that more involved process where we go back into Citation, we create the authorship network in Citation, visualize it with Gephi, then clean it up in Inkscape, and then export the final result, which is the image that you would actually see here. So again, all of this is based on that cleaned affiliation data from the exported data from whatever database we happen to be using. The second part of the collaboration analyses is the individual co-authorship analyses. So this is again based on the cleaned version of the data, but this time the author names. So again, we'll export it, clean it in OpenRefine, and then run through the exact same process that we mentioned for creating this, and then putting that into the report. So again, this is based on a series of steps to get to this one image. So we get the data from whatever database, we clean it in whatever tool we're using, create the data in Citation, visualize it in Gephi, clean it up in Inkscape, and then create the final version. So again, most of these things are based on the cleaned versions of the data, so that has to happen first in order for us to have accuracy and confidence in this final co-authorship network. The next page of the analysis is our research topics page. And so here we have the bibliographic coupling network is that article topic map on the left. Then the charts on the right are based on that bibliographic coupling network. So we'll pull the publications from Web of Science, create the bibliographic coupling network, export all of the results once they've been clustered in Gephi, as well as the topic map from Gephi. So we have all of that, and then once we have that exported node list with the topic areas assigned by the algorithm, we can then go in, name the research topics, and then count up the number of publications per topic or either publications per topic, which is the chart in the upper right, or the publications per topic per year, which is in the bottom right. Again, because we used that aggregate function file, we have both the article titles and the publication years in that bibliographic coupling network that we create in Gephi. So when we export that node table, we have the articles, the years, the titles, and then the clusters that they belong to, which is all of the information that we need to do these kinds of analyses. So again, once we export that list of publications, We'll then go in, we'll look at the publications in each topic area or in each cluster to get a sense for what the commonality is. We'll name the topic and we'll go from there. Within the NIH library, we will also sometimes do an extra step that doesn't actually get included in the report, but helps us in understanding what these topics are. So one of the things that we will do is we will export that node list that has all of the publication titles in it. And then we will create a word co-occurrence network where we actually calculate the modularity of, or the mode of the modularity class. And essentially what we do is we create this word co-occurrence network where we assign words to topics based on which topic it ends up occurring in most frequently. So it gives us a list of terms that appear in each one of those topic areas to give us an advantage, essentially, to give us a sort of a head start in this is what probably this cluster is about. So if in cluster 5, we see influenza, virus, genetic, genomic, those types of terms frequently occurring in that particular topic number, that gives us an indication, okay, that's probably about influenza, it's about viral genetics. That's kind of what we're thinking about for that, whereas maybe in topic 2, we see much more about malaria. So again, we start to get a sense for what these topics are based on that word co-occurrence network that doesn't actually get included in the actual report, but gives us more to go on when we're trying to decide what these topic areas actually are. So that's just a sort of a separate workflow that we do. It's not necessarily necessary, but it certainly speeds the process for what we're trying to work on in doing these analyses. So again, we'll do the bibliographic coupling network. We'll then do the word co-occurrence network where we assign terms to those clusters and then figure out what the clusters are named from there. We then move into the citation impact analyses once we have all of that done. So we grab the standard bibliometric indicators, mostly either from insights, mostly from insights in our internal working environment, where we do the total publications, citations per year, those types of things. We may also do that from the create citation report in Web of Science. It just depends. The percentile rank information, though, that all comes from insights. So what we'll do is once we have that publication set in Web of Science, we'll export it over into Insights and then download the data from Insights in the way that Yaling showed you in the citation impacts sections, where we download the actual percentile ranks and then assign the individual percentile numbers to classes. So if it's below 1, we'll call it top 1. If it's below 10, we'll call it below 10. Those types of things. So we'll assign those percentile rank classes based on the percentile numbers that we get from Insights, and then aggregate it to say how many of those papers are in the top 1%, top 10%, so on and so forth. When we have that, again, we can also then go through and count up the number of publications per subject category. We can also do the number of publications per percentile rank per institution. If we merge the Insights data back with our original data set, we can then use the cleaned author or organization affiliation information to break that into the individual collaborating institutions, so we can count up the number of papers per institution per topic. So we'll merge the Insights data back into the original Web of Science data that we cleaned, so we have the cleaned version of the affiliations to work with, and so that way we can count up the number of publications per percentile rank per institution. The next page is our part 2 of the citation impacts, where we look at citation impacts by individual authors. And so this is, again, when we're merging the data that we get from Insights back into the original data set, so we can use the cleaned version of the author names to do this. So that's, again, very, very important to get the numbers of citations, the numbers of publications right. In order to have accuracy in this particular analysis, we need to merge it back into those cleaned author names. So again, we'll use that Web of Science accession number to merge the Insights data with our original data set. And then once we have that merge done, we can then sum up the total number of publications, time cited, and percentile ranks per individual author in our data set. So again, we're merging that back with that original cleaned version of the data set to be able to have confidence in this particular set of analyses. The final versions of, the final pages in the report are our notes and explanations. And so this is where we go into a little bit more detail about the things that we just presented. So we will go into some of the more explanations, again, notes about how things are done, where the Web of Science subject categories come from, how they're assigned, what they're based on, information about the co-authorships, the co-authorship networks, how to interpret those networks, some of the filters that we may have applied to those networks. So again, most of the time with the collaboration networks, we'll filter it by either the number of co-authored works or the number of total authored publications per institution or author. We'll document what those filters are here in the notes so that people are aware of what those filters are, what they're looking at, what we did. We can also talk more about what that topic map is. So again, as I mentioned in the topic analysis, we need to have a lot of explanation about that bibliographic coupling network. So that's where we do that in our reports, is here in this notes field about the article topic map. So we can talk in more detail about what the dots are, what the nut lines are, all of that stuff. Again, how to interpret it, some of the filtering options that we used, all of those types of things. So again, we'll do a lot of that sort of explanatory work here in the notes at the end. Page 2 is, again, more notes, this time more about the citation impact analyses. So we'll talk a little bit about the actual percentile rank values, where those are coming from, how they're calculated, those types of things. We'll talk about some of the other metrics that are in here, like the H-index. One of the things that we find a lot about is people get very confused about data set H-indexes. They'll think what we're talking about is actually the average H-index of all of the authors in the data set, and that's not what we're actually doing here. So when we're presenting this data set H-index, we'll go into a little bit of explanation about what we're actually measuring, how that H-index is actually calculated for a data set rather than for an author, just to make it clear what it is that we're actually measuring here. We'll also, again, talk a little bit about the subject categories, about the collaborating institutions, filtering options that we've set, all of those types of things. We'll also talk about the individual authors. Again, we'll stress that the authorship analyses are based on all authors' own publications. They're based on just this particular set of years. They're not for an author's entire career. Just to, again, make it very clear what we're talking about, some other things like that. So again, we'll do a lot of this explanatory work here in the notes field to just sort of make people aware of some of the limitations that we have. Obviously, we can't talk about everything in here, but at least we'll talk about some of the things that are relevant to understanding the charts and graphs that we presented in the earlier parts of the report. And then finally, we always close with a little bit of information about the authors, who we are, what we look like, contact information, a little bit about our bios, those types of things, again, just to sort of put a name and a face with a name and to just sort of let people know that we're here, we're available, here's some of our expertise. If you're interested in getting in contact with us, here's our contact information. We do this both to sort of say, here's who we are, but also because these reports have a habit of ending up in other people's hands. So when we give them to somebody, they will often then give them to other people without our knowledge, which is fine, it's great. But again, when that sort of transfer takes place, it's nice to say, here's who we are, here's how to contact us, so that if people get a hold of a report and want to contact us either for a new analysis or to ask questions about this particular analysis, they have the contact information to be able to do so. And I've had a number of people contact me that way saying, hey, I got a hold of this report, I had a question about it, and had your contact information right there in the report. So it's always a good idea to include some of that information to sort of make that connection possible. So that was just a very quick introduction to what the report template looks like. Again, where we're getting the data, where all of those pieces fit into a larger report. So now I want to talk a little bit about how we sort of modify that report in certain situations and based on feedback from other people. So when we're working with customers, they often have their own questions and they have their own ideas about what they're interested in. So we often use our standard report template as a guideline to sort of focus some of those conversations. So these are ways that we'll sort of modify it in response to some of these customer requests. One deviation that we do a lot at NIH is to look at funding agencies. We at NIH are very, very interested in who funds research and who funds research in different areas, who collaborates on funding or who co-funds particular analyses, things like that. Practically speaking, most of these funding analyses come from PubMed rather than Web of Science or Scopus, just because the PubMed data is at least standardized, so we don't have to do the affiliation cleaning in the funding agencies that we might have to do with the author affiliations and author names. That has advantages in the fact that we don't have to clean it, but it also has disadvantages in the fact that PubMed only has certain funding agencies listed. It's really only accurate for NIH funding agencies and some international funding agencies. Very, very select list. So we have to be very clear about if we're doing this kind of funding analyses, we're really only looking at certain funding agencies. We're not, for example, looking at anything from China, Asia, or anything from Asia in general. We're not looking at anything from Latin America. We're not looking at anything from Germany, from a number of these other countries. So there are definite limitations to using this. But even within NIH, there are certain advantages. So we're very interested in which ICs tend to fund research and which institutions or institutes and centers tend to co-fund research. So the co-funding network that you're looking at here on the right is based on grants that are co-cited in papers. So if a single paper gets a grant from both NHLBI and NINDS, we can then create a link between those two ICs to say these are co-funded articles between these two ICs. And so we can build that in almost an identical way to our affiliation co-authorship networks to look at some of these co-funding networks to see not only where are the funding agencies or what are the funding agencies, but also where the co-funding happens, maybe where there are opportunities for co-funding, all those types of things like that. So that's one way that we'll then deviate from the template. We'll also then sometimes look at articles per funding agency per topic, citation impact per funding agency within a document set, all kinds of other elaborations like that. We will also do a number of deviations in the co-authorship and collaboration analyses. Some of them are sort of adding some additional metadata on top of an affiliation co-authorship analysis. So one example here is looking at an institution co-authorship network from biomedical articles from Peru. And so what we were then also interested in is within those affiliations, how many of them were actually from Peru versus the United States versus other countries, things like that, so that we could sort of look at where those collaboration patterns are actually happening and whether there's collaboration happening within Peru or whether it's more happening with a single institution in Peru with somebody in the United States, which then goes back to another affiliation in Peru. So we can sort of look at some of these other sorts of collaboration patterns by adding some additional information on top of things, We can also look at country level in collaboration, so Peru plus USA or Peru collaborations with China, Brazil, other countries, all kinds of things like that. We can also do elaborations of individual level collaboration networks where we're looking at the affiliations of those individual authors. We can add other information about maybe what topics those authors tend to publish on. So we can sort of color code an individual level co-authorship network based on the topic areas that people tend to work on. And so we can see whether or not people tend to collaborate with people who also work on the same topic or whether they work across topics. So all kinds of things like that. We can also color code people based on their affiliations, all kinds of other things. Probably the area that we do the most deviation on is in this area of research topics. We do things very, very differently in a lot of different ways. Some of them are either we're looking at mesh terms rather than publication data. So a lot of times we'll look at the number of publications per mesh term, publications per mesh term per year to get another sort of look at a publication set that's a little bit more static over time. Sometimes then we'll also look at text mining approaches rather than citation-based approaches. So as I mentioned in my course on topic analysis, there are these two different branches of topic analyses. There's citation-based methods and there are text-based methods. Citation-based methods are great for certain situations, but really bad for other situations. Using citation-based methods has two major limitations. One is it requires you to have very, very clean citation data. So it requires you to have citation information for all of the things in your data set in the exact same citation format for all of the things in your data set. So if you're getting publications, say from Scopus, for instance, that citation data that you get from Scopus is not clean enough for you to actually be able to create a citation network because there are variants in the citation formats. Or if you're working with grant data, you don't necessarily have citation data to begin with. So it sort of forces you to move over into other types of topic analyses. The other major limitation with citation-based approaches is scale. When you start talking about more than about 5,000 publications, it becomes very, very difficult to work with. Because it requires a lot of computing power in order to actually create one of these kinds of citation networks. It becomes very limited by the amount of computing power that you actually have available. It becomes a limiting factor in also the software that you're using, because you have to modify Cite2 in order to increase its memory allocation, and that becomes somewhat problematic in certain situations. So again, more than about 5,000 papers, and you start running into some of these issues. So for a lot of those reasons, I've moved much more into text mining approaches to sort of get around these things. So with text mining approaches, you don't have that citation accuracy problem because you're not working with citations, you're actually working with text. So you can theoretically then apply it to grants, you can apply it to Scopus abstracts, you can apply it to PubMed abstracts, whatever you happen to be, you can apply it to just about anything. The other advantage with this is scale. It scales very, very well. So what you're looking at here is actually the results of a topic modeling algorithm of about 50,000 publications by NIH authors over about a 5-year time period. So again, we're talking about an order of magnitude higher than what we were able to do with citation-based methods in a relatively compact and easy to use way. So with this type of an approach, the individual dots actually correspond to research topics rather than publications, and then they're connected based on whether or not publications in the data set were about both of the connected topics. So with this particular algorithm, you can actually assign topics or assign publications to multiple topics. So it's not a one-to-one thing. So if a paper is about both say, genetic variants and clinical trials, you can actually assign it to both of those subject categories. It doesn't have to be shoehorned into one or the other. So it's sort of another advantage to this particular approach, where you can sort of assign it to multiple categories. And so then, again, we can get a similar kind of visualization out of it, where we can look at the topic structure that emerges from the set of publications and sort of do the same kinds of things where we're looking at publications per topic per year, all of those other types of things, because the results of the algorithm give you those that type of data. So again, it's just another way that we tend to vary and to vary the approaches that we're using based on the limitations of the data set or the particular data set that we happen to be working with. In the arena of citation impact, probably the most common thing that we get asked to do is benchmark a particular laboratory or institution against other laboratories or institutions. So we want to compare what my citation impact numbers look like as compared to other institutions. We do that a lot. We get a lot of that. So the way that we tend to do that is, again, with these percentile ranks, because it controls for a lot of those variations in citation volumes per year and subject category and all the rest, to make those comparisons a little bit more accurate. It becomes problematic because not every research organization is the same. So actually getting an accurate comparator set is a real challenge, frankly. So we can have these citation comparisons, but whether or not we're actually making an apples-to-apples comparison is also dependent not only on the citation impact measures, but also on the characteristics of the organizations themselves. So there's always some caveats and some concerns to be built into this kind of benchmarking exercise. But we will do it on occasion, and we can do it. So in this case, again, we were looking at all the publications by all of the institutes and centers at NIH. They're always very interested in how they compare to other institutes and centers at NIH. So that is a thing that we can do. This would be the results of that comparison. I have removed all of the institutes and center names just for purposes of anonymity and so forth. I don't want people making those comparisons without, full understanding of how these metrics were actually generated. So I've removed that here. But again, this would be one of the ways that we would do this kind of comparison. So that's a little bit about our report and about how we do things, how we modify that report in various ways, and things like that. So now we're going to really shift gears and start talking about our learning processes. So again, in this, what we're really trying to do is just talk about sort of how we learned how to do these things, talk a little bit about our lessons learned, and just to give you an idea of sort of what our process looked like and sort of the lessons learned along the way. So I graduated from library school in 2009, in the fall of 2009, and I started immediately out of library school working for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So I actually was hired to work for one of NOAA's grant funding agencies called the Office of Ocean Exploration and Research, or OER. These are some really great folks, and their mission is to quite literally explore the ocean. The vast majority of the ocean floor has not been explored. Nobody's been to at least half of the ocean floor. So their job was literally to go out and see what was there. It's a very, very cool mission, but because it's so exploratory, people in the scientific realm didn't really take them seriously. They thought that people weren't really doing real science. We were just sort of going out and sort of doing these sort of explorations just to see what was there and not actually doing science while they were there. So they hired me to essentially get a sense for what are the publications that have actually come out of these expeditions to be like, no, look, we actually do science too. Like, we're not just exploring, we're doing science too. So they hired me to figure out what those publications were, assign them to particular expeditions, do all of that kind of stuff, and basically maintain that publication bibliography for them moving forward. So I spent the first couple of months sort of getting all of that in order. I set up a whole bunch of search alerts to alert me to new publications. And then I kind of sat back and said, all right, what else can I do? So they had hired me as a contractor, and they were paying my salary in full out of their discretionary funding. So as a contractor being paid with discretionary funding, they could decide just to not fund me, and then I would be out of a job. So my job security depended on me giving them good value for the money that they were paying to fund my salary. So I was always looking for ways that I could add value to what I was already doing. And so one way to do that was then to look at the bibliometric aspects of the publication set that I had just created. So once I had created all of these things, I can then say, all right, are they having a citation impact? To again sort of say, yes, we're doing real science, and this real science is actually being influential in other scientific research to help them keep their funding, essentially. So in 2010, we contracted out with a bibliometric analysis firm to basically do that research for us. And the problem was they were only able to successfully match about 80% of the publications that I knew were in their database. So they weren't able to match one publication in 5, which with a pretty small data set, this was only about 400 or 500 publications, so 1 in 5 really just wasn't useful. That was just not good enough. So I thought, well, I can at least match the darn publications. Maybe I should just do this analysis. So that's what I did. So I suggested to them, maybe I can go ahead and do this out of the funds that you're already paying, so you wouldn't have to pay this contracting company. You would get a full set of citation indicators, and then I could just sort of add this to the services that I provide to you. They were thrilled and said, great, go do that. So that's how I really got started in bibliometrics, is doing that kind of citation impact work for this particular program. So then I challenged myself that every time I updated it, I wanted to add something. So they wanted updates to this report on a quarterly basis to, again, just sort of have accurate numbers and updated numbers and so forth. So I challenged myself to say, so each new quarter, I want to add something to this report, whether it's making the chart look a little bit nicer, whether it's doing adding a new metric, whether it's adding a new analysis, whatever it happens to be. I wanted to just sort of add things as I went with this particular publication set to be able to use that both to add value to my services to OER, but then also to build my skills in analytics, because I saw this as a real opportunity for myself moving forward. So this time period from 2010 to 2011 was me really building skills in citation impact measurement. And as I was starting to do this, I started getting questions from other laboratories within NOAA who also wanted to do similar things. So what you're looking at here is an actual figure from one of my reports in 2011. I'm very embarrassed by it looking back on it now, but it is what it was, and so that's what I was able to do. So this was a percentile rank comparison for one of the laboratories at NOAA that they then used for their own laboratory evaluation. So again, I was able to sort of build my skills and sort of use those skills in other areas. As I was learning all of this, there were really no courses, there were no books, there were no trainings, there was no listservs, there really weren't any resources available to me in this time period for learning how to do stuff. So I was learning completely by reading journal articles, which is a terrible way to learn anything, because they always take things for granted, right? Like they will just mention something to decide. It's like, well, everybody knows that. Well, I don't know that. And so then I have to go back and start learning about these things like, oh, I have to learn about this other thing now because, yeah. So it was this whole long process of me trying to figure out how to do things. And so as I was reading these journal articles and I was keeping up with the bibliometrics journals, I kept seeing all of these things about network science, either co-authorship networks, topic analyses, all of this type of stuff. And it seemed to be this whole other branch of bibliometrics that I had not even thought about up to that point. But by 2011, I was like, all right, I need to learn how to do this stuff because there's a lot of opportunity here. So let me just buckle down and start doing some of this. So this is actually one of my first network visualizations. This is actually in one of my publications from 2013 about the ocean and exploration research bibliography. I published in Citometrics. So this is, again, one of those ways that I was trying to learn how to do bibliometrics in this very, very sort of limited set with a captive audience. Which leads me to my nemesis at the time, which was the Science of Science tool. So when I did the demos of doing collaboration analyses and also in topic analyses, I made the Science of Science tool look really easy to use. I made it look really easy. It's not. I made it look easy because I've been using it since 2011. So I've had a good 8 years to learn how to use this tool. But when I was first learning how to use it, I was trying to learn by myself without anybody to ask from the documentation that's available from the Science of Science tool wiki. It was not an easy process. I made mistakes constantly. I probably made every mistake that it is possible to make with the Science of Science tool. It felt like the Citation tool would break just simply because it felt like breaking. It would give me errors just randomly. I didn't think I had done anything differently, but it was giving me errors. Or it would give me errors just all the time. Maybe I was getting very good at things. I hadn't seen an error in a while, and then all of a sudden it's thought, now I'm getting too cocky. It's going to give me another error message, bring me back down to earth. So there were a lot of errors, and there was a lot of trial and error involved in figuring out how to actually use this thing. So again, be aware that having errors is completely normal, and I had a lot of them when I was learning. So moving on through 2012 to 2014, this was again mostly sort of consolidating skills that I was building. So I was gaining much more confidence in use of the tools, in my understanding of the theoretical underpinnings, all of those types of things. So I started then, again, more and more working outside of the ocean exploration research bibliography. I was still doing these quarterly reports every quarter, but at this point I was gaining enough confidence to be able to apply these things to other areas and started working with other groups within NOAA to be able to do things. So what we're looking at here is actually a collaboration with one of the scientists at NOAA around the area of geoengineering or climate engineering. And so this was actually a topic analysis of all of those publications on climate engineering to get a sense for what was going on in the research area, what the balance of research was in these different approaches, those kinds of things. And this is again from a publication from, I believe, 2013 or early 2014 that I co-authored with this particular investigator. I also started working with NOAA's Office of Evaluation to start building some of this bibliometric analysis into some of their evaluation workflows. So one of the things that they were doing is they were reporting the number of publications that NOAA authors had written every quarter. And they were doing that by a manual data call to all of the researchers to say, what did you publish last quarter they were compiling that manually and saying, this is what we published. So obviously, that was a whole lot of work for a very, very questionable set of data because not everybody responds. Everybody responds differently. There were double counting. It was kind of a mess. So what we did is we literally set up a publications database of NOAA articles. And so we started pulling articles from different databases to start compiling an actual sort of a master list of all NOAA authored publications, where we would then go in, assign them to the centers and the divisions of within NOAA to say not only what are these publications, but where did they come from, what was the fiscal year, what was the quarter, all of that stuff. So we started building this database in collaboration with the Office of Research, and we started thinking about applying analyses to these things in late 2013 and early 2014, which is when I actually moved to NIH. So in 2014, 2015 I made the transition from NOAA to my current position here at NIH, where I was really focused on doing these things full time. So at NOAA, I was starting to specialize in this, but I was still doing a lot of reference. I was still doing a lot of other library-specific things, whereas moving here to NIH, I was able to be much more specialized in doing publications as my primary work activity. So one of the things that we did very quickly at NIH was figure out that report template that I just walked you all through. We were very interested in coming up with both a template for what the reports were going to look like, but then also have something that we could use to sell the program. So we were hired here at NIH to literally invent the program from scratch. So Yaling and I were hired to create this program and to figure out what it looks like, market it within the NIH, all of those things. So what we needed was a product that we could literally market. And so we used these IC reports as a way to sort of build that template, both for marketing and then also for sort of getting the word out, but also for giving people something to react to. A lot of times when we talk to people, they don't necessarily know what's possible with bibliometrics. So we can often use these profile reports as a way of saying, here's some of the things that are possible that we can do, and then we can use that as a springboard for other things. So a lot of that first couple of years was really us sort of developing this template, figuring out what the services program was going to look like, how we were going to manage our time, all of that kind of stuff. Within NIH, though, it became very, very clear that the challenges were going to be very different. And the primary challenges were going to be around capacity and scale. At NOAA, I was working with relatively small data sets, and I was working with a relatively small number of analyses. You know, I was doing maybe 1 or 2 reports per quarter, something like that, on very, very small data sets. Once we got over to NIH, and once word started getting around NIH that we could do things, people started asking us to do more and more analyses and doing them in more complicated ways on larger data sets. So the capacity and scale both relates to the number of publications that we're working with. We very, very quickly had to scale from about 500 publications to 50,000 publications in a matter of years. So that was one of the major challenges for me, is to scaling up with the number of publications, but then also the number of requests that we started getting was pretty intense. We'll show some data later about just how many reports we do every quarter, but we do a lot. So we had to build in ways of both handling these very large data sets and then also streamlining the analytical process to be able to turn things around in a very, very quick manner to be able to deal with the number of results or the number of requests that we were getting. Which leads me to my nemesis, part 2, which is R and RStudio. I started learning how to write code after I got here to NIH. I started learning in maybe 2015 and started getting really serious about it in 2016. And it was literally to deal with these scale and capacity issues because R and RStudio is much more able to handle these very large data sets than things that I was working with in the past, i.e. Excel. And then it was also able to not only pull these very large data sets from the databases via APIs so that I wouldn't have to spend as much time downloading things. I could then also write modular blocks of code that I could then reuse from analysis to analysis to speed up some of the processing, to be able to sort of pull some of this stuff together much more quickly. So again, I got lots and lots and lots of errors in learning how to use this thing because, again, I was pretty much teaching myself how to write this. I did take a course on Coursera, which will, again, remain nameless, which was an extremely difficult and labor-intensive course. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it is the way that I actually learned how to actually get to work with code. I remember spending maybe 60 hours a week for a couple of weeks just taking this particular course. So it was a really intense environment, but it got me up to speed. So that now I'm much more able to do things. And again, having sort of gone through this with Citation made it much easier to go through the same process with RStudio because I kind of knew what to expect. I knew sort of what I was getting into, and I wasn't necessarily as frustrated by all of the error messages that I was getting. So I was sort of more able to deal with these things the second time around, though it was a very intensive and very mistake-ridden process. Which leads me to the present, where I am still learning how to do things. What you're looking at here is an alluvial diagram where I'm tracing the citation flows between research topics among several generations of publications. So I'm starting with a final systematic review, and we wanted to trace 2 generations of citations to say, how did these different research areas converge into a single clinical trial or a single research outcome? So what was the research body necessary in order for actually sort of making this breakthrough? So what did the field look like, and how did it converge on this particular breakthrough in a particular clinical trial setting? So again, I'm tracing citation flows through these different generations through various topic areas to try and get at this kind of a question. And so this is one of the things that's really great about working here at NIH is we get challenged with these kinds of approaches all the time. So the question from the customer was, can we figure out what knowledge was necessary in order to get to this particular breakthrough? And so it was up to me to figure out literally how to do that. So I invented the method, I invented the workflow, and then invented the way of actually visualizing it in order to actually respond to that particular question. So that's one of the really great things about working here is that we get these kinds of questions and we get the opportunity to literally invent new ways of analyzing and visualizing data in order to respond to these questions. So in order to do that, obviously, I need to keep learning. I need to keep learning different analytical methods. I need to keep learning different areas of research. I need to keep learning all of these other things. So I'm still within this learning process. Just a couple of weeks ago, I just learned how to use a new implementation of a topic modeling algorithm that I've been working with. Just a couple of months ago, I learned how to use a new gender estimation algorithm to estimate genders from first names. Like, it's just this constant process of building skills and building new ways of analyzing data in order to respond to customers to meet their particular information needs. So, which leads me to my lessons learned. So I have 3 of them. The first of them is persistence, doing basically the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. This is sort of harkens back to those error messages that I always kept getting. When you're learning how to use these tools, and particularly when I was learning how to use these tools, I didn't have people to ask. I didn't have anybody to ask to say, what does this error message mean, or how do I get around it? So I had to figure out what the problem was and just keep plugging away at it in order to then come up with the final analysis product. So I had to just keep going and going. And so I learned how to sort of make mistakes in a way that like I can learn from them, and just kind of doing it over and over and over again, and just keep going, keep plugging away at it in order to actually get the knowledge and the skills necessary to do what I need to do. The second is, again, related to these error messages, is figuring out what the heck that error message actually was. So if you're at all familiar with error messages in computer programming, they are really cryptic. They don't give you a lot of information, and they don't give you a lot to go on as to how to actually fix the problem. So it was up to me to decode some of those error messages and figure out what was actually going on, what the actual error was, and how to actually fix the error that was actually happening. So again, I had to learn how to sort of do this in order to fix the errors. This has become very, very valuable to me now, because it now allows me to invent these new analytical procedures. Because again, it's the same kind of a thing. It's a problem to be solved. Okay, if I know what the end result is going to be, I can work my way backwards to figure out how to actually get to that result. Or if I need to learn how to use a particular tool or write a particular function to automate a series of processes, I need to think logically about what the steps are in order to get to that final product. So again, that was a very valuable lesson for me in order to move forward and do a lot of things that I do. And the final sort of lesson learned is that you can actually learn from your mistakes. And in fact, that is the way that you learn, is actually by making mistakes. So I've gotten to some sort of this Zen attitude towards mistakes, where they are not necessarily bad things, they are learning opportunities. I will admit that if I'm still at the office at like 7:30 at night after a full day, after spending maybe 5 hours trying to solve a particular problem, I don't always have this kind of a Zen attitude towards it, but I try to. And I know in the bigger picture that making mistakes is in fact how you learn things, and it is in fact how you learn how to work with analytical tools. So just sort of get to a place where you're okay making mistakes, and that's probably the most valuable lesson of them all. So that was a very quick introduction to my learning process. I'm now going to turn it over to Yelding so that she can tell you about hers.
All right. Following up what Chris has just said, I'm going to talk a little bit about my process. And it's kind of interesting that I'll focus a little bit more about why I didn't learn instead of my learning process. Okay. So generally, people agree that there are 4 stages of a learning process. Okay. So the first one is unconscious incompetence, and then it's conscious incompetence, and it's conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. And I believe I've gone through the whole process, the whole stages, and I think I have a little extra. Probably all of you have gone through already, which I'll be talking about later. Okay, but starting from these 4 processes, okay, the first one, for me, it's actually pretty long since I was a library student. Okay, and I think that the first time I heard about citation analysis, by that time, I don't think it's called bibliometrics yet. Okay, I think my attitude was like, I don't know that I don't know how to do this. So it's kind of like, everyone can do this, because it's part of the collection development. So people were just talking about the journal impact factor. So it seems very straightforward to me, and I was like, anybody can do it. Okay, and then the second stage actually quite moved into when I graduated from school, and I started publishing my own stuff. And my attitude back then was like, it's just a number. Do I really care? I know it's just a citation. And as a researcher myself, I was like, do I need anybody to tell me how good or bad my research is, or what I should be doing, or anybody to guide me what to do? So it's sort of like, I don't really care. It's just a number. Okay, so at that time, it was really unconscious incompetence. Okay. What Chris and I share, I think, was the turning point of 2010. Okay, so that year, I was pregnant with my second child, and I don't know if it's fortunately or unfortunately, my husband got another job in Maryland, and back then we were in New Jersey. So I was in the dilemma of either raising two young kids on my own, or I would have to switch jobs, and relocate to Maryland, and then start other things. And it's actually quite a struggle to us, because I've been in New Jersey for a long time. And so I actually took a year off to have my kids delivered. And then I commuted for another year and decided that it's not working. And then I started to think about what are the things, or what are other options that I can do. And one thing I didn't mention was that when I was teaching, my area was actually not bibliometrics at all. It was children's services, children's literature, and also information behavioral services. And one thing that I have to teach is research methods, and that has a lot to do with analytics. And okay, so 2010, one of my colleagues back then had a draft out in research methods. So that's a book about research methods, and one section, it's only like 1.5 pages, is about bibliometrics. And I had to acknowledge that that's actually the first time I heard about the term bibliometrics. Okay, and it's only like 5 paragraphs, and basically talking about some theory of bibliometrics, and it's not the thing that we talked about at all. It talks about the journal distribution or article distribution, the Bradford distribution law. And I was like, okay, what is it? Do I really have to do that? Because I'm one of the faculty members that have to teach research methodology. Okay. So for me, research methods is both basically just 2 paradigms, qualitative, quantitative. For qualitative, we look at the non-numerical data, how you can gather the data, interpret that. For the numerical data, you do statistical analysis, either descriptive or inferential, things like that. But now, it seems to me that I have to add another dimension about bibliometrics in the numerical data part. Okay. And doing analysis is not difficult, that's for me, at least for me. I don't think it's difficult. So doing analysis, I think, yes, I can do it. Okay, but how do I really make sense of it? Okay, so that's the time I actually understand that this is something I don't really know what to do. Okay, so the next stage, still the conscious incompetence, is that I don't want to teach it. I know I'm supposed to include it in my class because it's part of the method, although it's new to me, but I don't really want to teach it for several reasons. Okay, for all of the methodology courses in library school, it always has very low enrollment. Why? A lot of time people think it's not important, it's boring, it's too theoretical, it has to do a lot of numbers, it is analytical, it has nothing to do with the practical life, the practical work that they're going to do. Okay, and the second reason, there is very low demand from employers. Back then, not too many libraries, or I can probably say that not too many libraries here in the United States had a demand about analyzing publications or citation analysis or bibliometric analysis. So basically, the library schools do not think it's important to include that part. My students do not think it's important to include that part. And there are not many materials back then talking about bibliometrics, especially the practical part. There are some theories, but again, it's different from what we have talked about recently. Okay. And I think one of the most important things is that I know that I don't know how to do this. So I don't know how to exactly to do the bibliometric analysis and how to really make sense of it to interpret that. One of the things that I did was actually to look for other syllabus by other faculty members. So I went back to my alma mater, and Jonathan Ferner was one of the faculty members that I had earlier back when I was in UCLA. And he was actually one of the first people, I think, in the United States to teach bibliometrics. So I pulled out his syllabus. And you can tell that it's actually, again, very theory-laden. So it talks about all sorts of different theory, including statistics, probability, and modeling, things like that. And I said to myself, no, I just cannot do it. Even if I can copy his syllabus, I don't think that would be helpful to my students or to help people to really understand what is going on. So I didn't really include bibliometrics in in-depth discussion in my courses. It's kind of like what my colleague did. I just include one session talking about the possibility of what bibliometrics can do. Okay. And then, as I mentioned, that there was the change for a lot of things. 2010 for me is a personal change, but it's also a change for a lot of scholarly communications. You can see there are a lot more publications popped out. And there is also the emphasis being pushed out on evidence. You want everything is evidence-based. Evidence-based services, evidence-based medicine, evidence-based a lot of things. So there actually was a push to look for, can you provide evidence on the research performance? Okay, so combining a lot of the things that just took place at the same time, I talked to myself, let me just try to learn. Okay, so I think I started a little bit later, so I was lucky enough to get more readings, a little bit more online tutorials and experts and colleagues even when I started here. Okay, and I think one of the most important things for me is the change of the mindset. So bibliometrics is not just quantitative. So what I understood was that there are a lot more things beyond the citations. So there is the text analysis part, there's the subject analysis. Okay, and it is not just about citations. There are so many other things that you can look at because of the development of the technology. The more data that is being included or being crawled by those data, the vendor databases, the more things that we can do to make sense of it. So that actually leads me to the conscious competence, okay, to the major change of the mindset that bibliometrics is not just an analysis, not just an analysis of numbers. It actually has to do a lot of other things. Say, for example, it has to do with data visualization. It is something that is quite new to me. Okay, and then it is not just analysis, it's actually a type of library services, although it's very rare for people to look at it as a service, but it is a support services to research. So I dive in, okay, through a lot of learning through the trials and the mistakes, and again, I almost did the same thing. I went to the site too, and they have their manual, they have their workflow. I just download their data sets and did each one of them, follow their workflow, made mistakes, and then created things that I had to do. But I think one of the things that I sort of think that I had advantages was that I had the basis of the concepts, and I know the limitation, and I know the methods already. Okay, so for me, it's more like how to really make use of the tools, how to really know the systems, to know what they can offer, and then to know how to communicate with the clients, the users, because there are so many different stakeholders. And how do I communicate or interpret these results to them? Okay. But the unconscious competence part came really late, I would think, probably the most recent 2-3 years. Okay. It's the stage when I think I can say that I can teach you how to do this. And people told me that you made this look really easy. Okay. But again, it's also at the same period, I started asking myself a lot of questions like, are there other ways of doing this? Just like doing any research, there are always different ways doing the research. And for doing bibliometric analysis, there are different tools, there are different methods. So are there different ways of doing that? And can I connect it with other areas? As I mentioned, I came from very humanity and social sciences part. Can I communicate or connect bibliometrics with, say, for example, children's literature? Can I connect bibliometrics with public library services? So there's something that I have been thinking about, like how do I connect these different things? So that actually leads to my next stage, seeking meaning. Okay, so I constantly ask myself, do I really know what I'm doing? So I know these data, I know these sources, I know the analysis, I know the tools, I know the limitations. But do I really know what is the big picture behind? When I'm done with the analysis, when I tell my clients that, okay, 20% of your publications are being ranked as the top 10%, things like that, or when I did the topic analysis saying that most of your publications were in the field of public health. Okay, what does it mean in the end? And what's the meaning bring to their research? And what am I really promoting? Am I really promoting their research? Or am I just promoting the tools, the strategy? Or maybe am I just promoting research assessment? And am I really a neutral agent? Because of the various tools that we can pick, and when I say that I think this one works better than the other at that time, am I a really neutral agent? And when I know that there are so many limitations and mistakes or errors in the systems, do I really trust what they can provide me? And can I really trust the results that I provide to my clients? And because of the development of a technology, back then it was, okay, I would think that this 10 years from 2010 to 2020 is the first decade of bibliometrics in professional world or in library services. Okay, there are a lot of the tools being developed and systems are being updated constantly. And you can see that because of the work or the research, the development in AI, you will see that a lot of the things can be automized. Okay, so in the end, a lot of the things that we are doing right now can probably be replaced by software, by tools in just a few years. So the final question that I ask myself a lot is that, How am I different from the vendor products ultimately? Right now, we have a lot of custom projects that the vendor systems or tools cannot really do yet. But I believe with the pace of the technology development, this can be done easily just in a few years. So I constantly ask myself, what can I do? How am I being different from the products ultimately? And that actually bring back to my learning processes. Okay, so when I'm trying to seeking meaning out of what I'm doing, a lot of the time, I have to go back to the conscious incompetence because I just do not know a lot of the things that is going on. I started with analytics, and then I know that I'm not good at visualization, so I learned it. And then I know that I'm not good at programming, and then I learned it. And then, okay, what's the next step? What is the next big wave that I'm going to face? I don't know, but I'm still exploring. And that's actually the circle of my learning, or probably not learning. All right. So for the final thoughts, I actually wanted to share with you what our little team has accomplished. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I just had a couple more things. So a couple of things that just sort of final thoughts, take-home messages from a lot of this. Once again, learning is a process. I think we both sort of spoke to that already, that you're never done learning anything, particularly bibliometrics. There's always more in the analytics space to learn. There's more in the meaning parts of it. What does it mean? There's always more out there to learn. So you're never actually done learning anything. The other thing is we always want to acknowledge limitations, both our own limitations and then also the limitations of the tools that we're using. I think we both sort of spoke to that a little bit already, but again, just being aware that we have limitations, being humble about what we do, what we think we're doing, what we may be doing, what we may not be doing, what we may not be capturing. We always just need to be very aware of that. And so whenever we're talking to people about bibliometrics, we always want to have these limitations in place and always talk about them in ways and bring them up in discussions with customers to just make them aware that there are a lot of these limitations. We need to sort of be aware of that. But at the same time, there are a huge number of opportunities in this space. Again, with library services in particular, there's a real opportunity for us to, again, add value to services and provide new kinds of services within libraries that haven't really been provided in the same way before. It's a new way of doing things, and so there are a lot of opportunities related to that, and so we want to be open to those new opportunities and those new ideas. So to sort of speak to how many opportunities there are, wanted to just sort of go back to just how busy we are in the library space. And so this shows you the total number of services provided per quarter over the 5 years that we've been at NIH. You'll see it did take about 1.5 years for us to really get established and for the sort of number of requests to sort of peak. So we definitely took a while to get the word out and to get awareness around the NIH community. So be patient when doing bibliometrics and sort of trying to get things out there. It just takes a long time to gain acceptance around the whatever institution it is that you're working on. It just takes time. But subsequently, you can see that we provide somewhere around 50 services per quarter, which ends up being around 18 a month between the two of us. So that keeps us very, very busy. We tend to average about 8 actual full analyses every month. So each one of us is doing maybe 3 to 5 analyses every single month. So again, that sort of speaks not only to the scale of what we're doing, but it also speaks to the opportunities that are there for us to be able to do these kinds of things, because there's a need for it, at least here at NIH. There's a need for competence and experience in actually providing these services and doing these kinds of analyses, and also being able to interpret them in ways that are actually appropriate and not overstate their importance or overstate what we're actually learning from these things. Again, we can, a friend of mine in the evaluation space always used to talk about how evaluation never gets you to the truth. It only gets you to a less imperfect understanding of the truth. And I liked that way of putting things. And so I think, again, having that as sort of our perspective and where we're coming from is we're not going to tell you what the truth is. We're just going to give you a less imperfect understanding of what it might be. And so using these things to be able to get to that is a real opportunity both here at NIH and I think more generally in libraries around the world. So that's it. Thanks to all of you for making it this far and for learning with us through this whole series of courses. Once again, we will be adding some additional training series or additional trainings as we can to sort of supplement this whole process. But once again, congratulations for making it this far, and thanks all for listening.